And welcome back to the Livingston Parish News Weekly Show, a podcast brought to you by the Livingston Parish News. My name is McHugh David, publisher and editor of the news, and this is the third of three podcasts I'm doing with this gentleman this morning. I'm going to let him introduce himself. Good morning, sir. How are you?
I'm fine. Good morning, McHugh. This is Buddy Mincey, State Rep, District 71, Sedona Springs, Walker area, and I'm currently running for a Senate in District 13.
And we have talked about the first one was a legislative wrap-up. Of course, you'll be heading into an extraordinary session to discuss and possibly undo some vetoes by the governor. And then we talked about capital outlay for a little bit. And now we're going to be talking about an ongoing sort of legislative drainage and mitigation effort that you have made. Of course, not a whole lot to talk about from 2020, just sort of dealing with COVID, right? But getting into the 2021 regular session, we talked, and I would really recommend folks to go back to those other two. You can visit them at www.livingstonparishnews.com/podcast. They'll also be on our Facebook page, and they are also on any podcast platform you want to listen to. But one of the things that we discussed in both that podcast and the next one was the process that goes into these things. It is long, it's arduous. It takes, working with colleagues, discussing some things up there at the legislature, sometimes getting into a little bit of a fight, to get some things. It's very competitive. So you started off in 2021 with a couple of concurrent resolutions, which means that it's both houses coming together. Let's start with 46, which is the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority. Those of you out there may have heard of it as CPRA. And, one of the things that you wanted them to do is get involved in the Amite River Basin. So tell us a little bit about what this HCR 46 was all about.
Yeah, McHugh, and let me just say this. I think a lot of people in our community are frustrated, especially the ones who've lived here for so long. You've seen our parish grow so much. We all sit in the same traffic issues, sit in the same traffic. We all worry about flooding whenever the water, we get a lot of rain or a big storm comes in. Our area has always worried about flooding along the Amite River, but 2016 changed that, and we're hypersensitive about it. As a legislator, I've been really focused on quite a few things. One of them being infrastructure. One of them being education, and the last one being flood protection. This has been a priority for me. All my life I've dealt with floods. I've never, prior to 2016, I never flooded, but I know plenty of people, family and friends who have histories of flooding, 76 and 83, and some of those historic floods back in the day. And I've always been involved in that process. I've always been involved in helping people sandbag. I've always been involved in helping them clean their houses out after it's flooded. I remember whenever I was real young, I stayed up all night helping people pump out houses, and so I've dealt with flooding all my life. It's something I live real close to Amite. It's something that I'm very specifically focused on. But 2016, it was in my house as well as 94% of our parish. So flooding is something that's on all of our radar, and rightfully so. So legislatively, we started conversations in 2020 trying to address the dam on the interstate that flooded the northern part. But in 2011, 21, we actually had some legislation that we done. So one of the first things that I wanted to do, Congressman Graves had secured $1.2 billion for Louisiana in response to the 2016 flood, so we can try to put things in place to prevent it from happening again. The governor took that it was designated for the 16 flood, but the governor took that money and he spread it across the state. He spread it across the state in a competitive base. You had to go out there and apply for it, and you had to be competitive to win those awards. And Amite River Basin has been around for a long time. I think it's been around since 1982. They put Amite River Basin in a region to go after that Louisiana Watershed Initiative funding that stretches from the Mississippi River all the way to the Mississippi line. So we're in a bureaucratic region of 6 flood zones, and And I thought we should be in a position to where the Amite River Basin advocates for itself. So I initially started out trying to identify or trying to do something to make the Amite River Basin its own region. And in doing that, we ran into an obstacle. The Louisiana Watershed Initiative was by executive order only. It was not statutory. So as a legislator, I couldn't do anything to improve that process. So what could I do? During those conversations, it came to light that there was a lot of opportunities that we could do something with the Amite River Basin Commission. The Amite River Basin Commission is empowered for floodplain management of 7 parishes, including Livingston. The problem with them is, they've been in existence since 1942, and they've only done one project. And that's the Coamite River. The Coamite River diversion is the Amite River Basin's one-hit wonder. It's the only thing they've done it. And the only reason we're doing it is because Congressman Graves has gotten it funded for us. So, in that process, there was a lot of my colleagues who've been around and frustrated with Amite River Basin. They actually wanted to dissolve it. They wanted to do away with it. I saw it as an opportunity for us to improve it. So HCR 46 and 21, we directed CPRA to coordinate a comprehensive evaluation of the Amite River Basin and give us some suggestions. The suggestions they will be working towards was the foundation for a piece of legislation that I passed the next year. And then HCR 82 we did in 21 as well. Again, those conversations started in 2020 to get DOTD to give us a solution to interstate barrier. We passed the resolution HCR 82 to ask them to study it. So in 2022, this was a significant piece of legislation that we passed. It was HB 686. And it basically overhauled Amite River Basin Commission. I'm going to give you some highlights of some things that we changed. We expanded their jurisdiction. We changed the number of commissioners. We had 7 from the parish and 6 from legislators. We required qualifications of our commissioners. Some of the at-large commissioners, we made them have engineering backgrounds, civil engineering backgrounds, floodplain management, and so project management and so forth. We required live board meetings. We added CPRA and PLD on the committee. DOTD was already there in the capacity of an advisory capacity, non-voting. We added CPRA, which is our coastal restoration protection agency, and also PLD, which is a Pontchartrain levee district. We required a 2/3 votes for anything that they move forward. They got to have a 2/3 vote to approve a project. And the 2/3 vote in a 7 parish that's all competing amongst themselves is going to make them work together. We established a land bank that the Amite River Basin has a lot of land that they bought on both sides of the canal. They actually can do a wetlands mitigation bank. And then we required the board to develop a master plan, required the board to develop an annual plan for watershed management, and then required each parish to submit their annual hazard mitigation plan. Then the next thing we worked on was HR 149. We asked ARBC to work in conjunction with CPRA to look at the surge protection from the Lake Maurepas and also the erosion of the north shore of Lake Maurepas in Livingston Parish. Looked at dredging of the Amite River. We looked at dredging the confluent area of the Amite River where the Amite River dumps into Lake Maurepas, going out into the lake and trying to get it to have some capacity. We also asked them to assess the effects of the pumps and levees of other surrounding parishes. So we've asked for them to do that study, and we're waiting for those results. We also passed HR 156, which requested the Congress to make some investments into the Amite River Basin. So we're working with Congressman Graves and our senators to try to get some more money in the parish. And then we did HR 181. HR 181, again, I couldn't pass legislation to make the Amite River Basin have its own region, but I passed a resolution that basically, directed OCD to do this. And then Senator White did one of the SR 164. And now look, we passed those resolutions, both those resolutions unanimously, but the LWI, Louisiana Watershed Initiative, did not want to do it. So I had to fight them for probably 6 to 9 months. Went to multiple meetings, work groups with them to make sure they had a complete understanding of the legislative intent. Our intent was for the Amite River Basin, which is the only floodplain in this listed statutorily. Our intent was to have us as our own Louisiana watershed region, and I'm explaining a little bit why that was so beneficial. That same year in 2022, worked with Senator White to secure $8 million for ARBC to develop some master plans, and we worked with Speaker Shake Snyder, to get $10 million dedicated to the Amite River Weir. This is the weir diversion that we talked about earlier. So in 2023, we've talked before about the report that I asked DOTD to give us to solution on the Amite River.
Well, right, and you brought up the resolution that you passed in 2020, or we skipped over it, excuse me. You did pass HCR 82 in 2021. If you go back to a discussion we had on your legislative wrap-up, you discussed how basically they wasted 2 years.
That's correct. So the report, look, we worked with them in good faith. They assured me that if I gave them 2 years, they would give us a practical and cost-effective solution to that barrier. Here's the solutions. Number one, they said we're going to build an elevated structure for 30 miles at a price over $10 billion. Number two, they were going to go and tear down the interstate, tear it all the way down to the grade level of surrounding area, and basically rebuild the interstate. Number three, they were going to remove the barrier completely and have no barrier there at all, so that opposing traffic would have no separation, nothing in between it. And then number four, they actually talked about they were going to do something, along the drilling holes or something on the barrier. But basically, we worked with them in good faith for 2 years for them to give us a cost-effective and practical approach, and they gave us, a report that was insulting. So in 2023, we came back and we passed HB 406. Basically, it puts me where I started 2 years prior to trying to get them to give us a solution. We passed HB 406, which mandates that DOTD gives us a cost-effective and practical solution. And once that barrier flooded, it compounded the flooding in Denham Springs Walker on the north side of it. Once we get that solution identified, we'll go after some capital outlay to get it fixed.
Okay, so you wanted to, there's a 2023, we just talked about the cost-effective solution. You wanted to give an Amite River Basin Commission update. I do want to give some context for some people here, though. First and foremost, the Louisiana Watershed Initiative, if you don't know what that is, was developed by the governor's office, specifically Office of Community Development. This was funded by a block grant, community development block grant that came out of Washington, D.C. Basically, it divided the state up into, I believe it's 7 watersheds.
Yes.
And each watershed was going to, as you mentioned.
Actually, it was
8 watersheds, and each watershed was tasked with banding together, which of course is an interesting exercise in and of itself, and compete for phased out dollar appropriations that would come once every 2 years.
Correct. Over
a 6-year period. Livingston Parish, and specifically the Amite River, was thrown in with St. Helena, Tangi, Washington, and St. Tammany.
EBR.
And EBR. Oh, my goodness, I forgot EBR was in there. So, that brings me to Amite River Basin Commission. 82, 83 is roughly correct. This is a sub entity of the state that does not exist anywhere else. They had a lot of interesting background to them. They've been collecting a property tax now for about 35 years.
20
years. And of course, one of the interesting things that we have noted in the past is that because of the increased cost of poker, it has become more cost efficient for them to use that money on land acquisition and planning, and then trying to go to the state, to the federal government to try to get money to actually enact projects. I had a bit of a tiff myself with the ARBC a few years ago because they were worried that might hurt their tax funding. But people can see these dollar amounts. You and I are going to be talking about the co-meet here in just a minute, and it's consistently increasing tab. But give us a little bit of an update on how the changes have gone from 2022 and what's going on with ARBC. And we'll start with a new board was installed on February 7th of this year.
That's correct. So, and let me just go back and, again, just touch base on it. Amite River Basin has been around for a long time, but it's just been stagnant, and it's only worked on the one project. But it was a good instrument. It was a good instrument to actually provide a regional approach to floodplain management. We saw that as an opportunity to increase it. We made the changes in HB 686 in 2022, and it basically enabled the Amite River Basin to be rejuvenated, if you will. We took an existing instrument and made it better, and I'm gonna go over some of their successes that they've had in just a real short period of time. So that new board was installed February the 7th. So they've only been there for about 5 months. Already they've established some committees. They got a project inventory committee. So they vetted close to $500 million worth of flood risk reduction projects for potential submission in the Louisiana watershed for round 2. Now, me clarify something for you. That $1.2 billion was intended to help us prevent a repeat of the massive flooding that we had in 2016. So, I would argue that Livingston Parish was 94% of it was inundated with water. 94% of our residents were flooded. We were one of the hardest hits parishes that there were. In round 1 of Louisiana Watershed Initiative funding, in that block grant that you talked about, we didn't get $1. We didn't get anything. I attended several of their meetings and expressed, how disheartened and how it was just so disappointing. And it wasn't fair because that money was generated for parishes like us. We didn't get any, but we didn't do our job to be competitive in that process. So, the ARBC, which is they're the ones that are designed to take a regional approach and do floodplain management. They didn't submit one project in round 1. So again, and since it's been redone in 5 months, they vetted over $500 million worth of potential projects, and they've submitted $85 million worth of flood risk projects in the LWI for review and consideration in round 2. They've also developed their first ever project as a new board to submit on behalf of the commission. They established an executive director committee, developed the first ever job description, developed a salary range, and they're advertising for a new executive director right now. So we're getting off on the right foot. The executive director had been there for a long time, had resigned. They've got over 50 applicants at this point. And then they developed a procurement guidance. Before, there really wasn't a whole lot of a need of a procurement guidance because they wasn't procuring anything. But now we've tasked them with generating projects. And so they did a guide to ensure the proper process, policy, and procedures in respect to advertising, award, and professional services. And then here, I think this is some of the most important thing. They've procured $4 million worth of a basin-wide study via the capital. This is to go back and study the region. And then they've worked with GOSEP, and they've obtained $3.5 million in HMGP funding with no cost sharing requirements to fund flood risk reduction projects within the area. So all these things that we just went over, the ARBC has just been able to accomplish. We didn't have those opportunities before. So the HB 686 that we passed in 2022 enabled this to happen. And hopefully this is the beginning of a lot of good announcements that come out of ARBC. But hopefully we've given them and put them in a proper posture that they can do some good work. And I'll say this, that I think our Amite River Basin in its current posture is something that the other areas of the state are looking at as a role. This is what they want. They want to make their areas do the same thing. So it's created a pretty good bit of buzz across the state. But I think more importantly, it's created a tremendous amount of opportunity for us in our parish.
Right, and I mean it's a engine, a function that we've had. It just, the original scope kind of got lost in sort of a lack of funding and to a certain extent a lack of direction. And so it's going to be interesting to see. And I would like to inform people, when I say lack of funding, it's the comment I made earlier. The price of poker on doing full-on projects is just too much for a property tax to function, but that does not make it unimportant. There's still planning that can be done. You and I have discussed this in all of our podcasts. There is a process to everything, and it takes, there's a competitive advantage that you can get by having an entity like this that is funded, that can develop things like project ideas, master plans, that sort of thing. So it does give both Livingston Parish and itself as an entity an advantage over others. Last but not least, we brought it up a couple of times, but I'd like you to make a couple of comments on the Amite River and the Amite River Diversion Canal. I know that there was a House bill about that this year. I know that Congressman Graves has continued to announce that the price continues to go up, but there is some federal funding there as well. Tell us a little bit about HB 514.
Yeah, again, look, I don't know of anybody that's been more engaged in ARBC, and making it successful than I have. I've worked extensively with CPRA. I've worked extensively with Congressman Graves' office, and we're trying to put us in a position where we can deliver. And delivery takes money, right? And going through there trying to identify funding mechanisms to enable them to do projects. We had 9.6 million, I think, was set aside in reserved funding. So from 2020 to 2022, Amite River Basin collected property taxes in the Comite impact area for the matching fund requirement of this federal project. Most state and federal projects have a matching fund component, 20 to 25%, whatever it may be. The state or the federal government put some skin in the game, but they want the locals to put some skin in the game as well. This project ended up being $1 billion. It would have cost us, upwards of 250 million to be able to meet our match. But fortunately, Congressman Graves got the matching requirement waived, and there was an increase identified because of inflation and all those other obstacles that they ran into. We knew the project was over 476 million, but we also had the reassurance from Congressman Graves and the Corps that they were going to fund the project. There was no expectations of the locals matching any kind of part of that project. It was waived congressionally, and they were so you had 9.6 million that was sitting there that you couldn't do anything with, and again, I'm looking at trying to identify projects that we can do, trying to money sources. So we got 9.6 million that's sitting there, this idle that you can't touch. It's reserved. What are we going to do with it? So I passed a bill that would enable a vote of the people who paid the tax, to rededicate that money for projects that stay within that Comite impact area. That could consist of the Comite. If that money was needed for construction of the Comite, you would have to do this same type of legislation to rededicate that money so it can be used for something else. That money was dedicated specifically to local matching funds. No local matching funds required. There was an opportunity for us to take that money and put it to work. So my bill, HB 514, did just that. It allowed the Amite River Basin to take it to the vote of the people who paid for the property tax and rededicate it. It didn't pick any projects. It didn't give any timelines. It didn't say they had to do anything. It just removed the barrier that enabled them to do that. And my goal in that whole time was to be able to generate some projects in the Comite impact area. That Comite impact area consists of 3 parishes. Mostly is made up of these are the people who are going to benefit the most from the Comite diversion. It was primarily probably 75% of it's EBR. Another small percentage is in Ascension, and the smallest percentage of impact area in Livingston Parish is us. And it's basically from 4H Club Road west. So just the floodplain management area, the floodplain area. So, those are the only people who paid for the property taxes for the matching funds. So we wanted to regenerate that money by a vote of the people and do more projects. I ran into a lot of opposition. The greatest opposition we had was from those trying to look out for the best interest of East Baton Rouge. East Baton Rouge was obligated contractually in an agreement that they have signed many years ago. They're obligated for the maintenance of that project. But EBR was identified that money, and they wanted that money to be able to use for maintenance. So that's where most of the opposition came from. And we proposed the bill to rededicate it, and received opposition. So then we amended the bill. I amended the bill and tried to pass it that basically said we're going to take that money that was dedicated for matching funds. When it's not used for anything, we're going to give it back to the taxpayers. And I tried to amend that bill, and both measures failed. It was very disappointing to me, but it was obvious that the only people who benefited from the defeat of HB 514 is going to be East Baton Rouge, because they are going to try to come back at some point and try to get that money for their maintenance. Whereas I was trying to get it for more projects in the area, and also trying to rebate it to the the taxpayers that paid it. And unfortunately, we were unsuccessful.
Well, and it's it's interesting because we've discussed a lot of federal money coming in to complete that project, so they didn't, initial skin in the game was low. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that money going forward, because they're still going to have to go to the legislature to try to get it for themselves, correct?
Yeah. So if I may add, I didn't just come up with this idea on my own. I discussed the HB 514 with a lot of people, including Congressman Graves' office. And there was no question. There was never a question on whether or not the federal government was going to fund the remainder of that project. We had that assurance when we filed the bill, and we had the assurance of that when we debated the bill. And Congressman Graves confirmed that a couple of days ago when he announced that in fact the federal government has covered the additional $476 million in expenditures overrun. So the foundation that we based the bill on was the fact that there was going to be no federal matching funds required. Let's free up that money and let's do something with it. And that was the basis of it. But again, I worked with Congressman Graves' office before and CPRA before we proposed the bill, and he just confirmed that in fact it is funded, completely funded.
So, going to be interesting to see what happens to that money in the future. Well, thank you, sir.
Yep.
Appreciate the update on drainage and infrastructure. And of course, we always recommend, if you were curious about any of the juicy details that were mixed into all this, of course, you can go back and watch the two previous podcasts. The first one was your legislative wrap-up, then a capital outlay, which has usually mostly to do with infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, we just talked about flood mitigation and drainage. So, and of course, you can see those at www.livingstonparishnews.com/podcast. If you'll introduce yourself, sir.
Yes, Buddy Mincey, State Rep from District 71, which is the Denham Springs, Walker area. And I'm running for Senate District 13. And as always, it's a pleasure to sit down with you, McHugh.
Thank you, sir. Always a pleasure to sit down and talk with you as well. Please remember the news is on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube once a week in print on Thursdays. It's $7 a month to get that in your mailbox. We're also online, www.livingstonparishnews.com. We appreciate you joining us, and we'll see you next time.